For 25 years, a mother dedicated her life to caring for her comatose son until she noticed something strange. She installed a secret camera. What she discovered changed everything. In the small town of Oakwood, Oregon, Sarah Cole began another day in her 25-year routine. By 6 a.m., she was already up, preparing to take care of her son, Jason. Sarah, a 65-year-old retired nurse, entered Jason's room. The space was filled with medical equipment, with constant beeping and flashing lights. At the center, lying in a hospital bed, was Jason, still as he had been for the past 25 years. "Good morning, my love," Sarah whispered softly, opening the curtains to let in the sunlight. "It's a beautiful day outside. The flowers we planted are starting to sprout." As she adjusted the sheets and checked the monitors, Sarah remembered the fateful day that changed their lives forever. Jason was just 20 years old with a promising career as a musician ahead of him. He was returning from a gig when a drunk driver hit his car. The accident left Jason in a deep coma. Sarah sighed, pushing away the painful memories. She focused on her daily task, checking Jason's vital signs and jotting everything down in a notebook worn from use. At 9 o'clock, Kiara, the young home care nurse, arrived. "Good morning, Mrs. Cole," she greeted with a warm smile. "How are things today?" "As usual, dear," Sarah replied. Jason had a peaceful night. Kiara began performing the more complex medical procedures, while Sarah watched attentively. Although she trusted Kiara, Sarah never left Jason's side during these moments. At noon, after Kiara had left, Sarah sat beside the bed with a book in her hands. "Shall we continue our story, Jason?" she asked, opening the book at the bookmarked page. Her gentle voice filled the room as she read, pausing occasionally as if waiting for Jason to comment. Later, Sarah played some of Jason's favorite rock classics. The music echoed through the room, bringing a bit of life to the quiet atmosphere. "Remember this song, son?" Sarah asked, holding Jason's hand. "You used to play it at all your gigs. You always said it was your lucky song." The day passed slowly, with Sarah alternating between medical care, reading, and one-sided conversations. Sometimes she talked about the weather, other times about neighborhood gossip. Anything to keep Jason connected to the outside world. In the evening, as she adjusted Jason's pillow, Sarah noticed a slight movement in his fingers. Her heart skipped a beat for a moment, but she calmed down. It wasn't the first time this had happened, and doctors always said they were just involuntary reflexes. "Good night, my love," Sarah whispered, kissing Jason's forehead. "Tomorrow is another day. Who knows what it will bring?" With one last look at her son, Sarah turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow of the monitors. She headed to her room next door, leaving the door open as she always did, ready for any call during the night. Lying in her bed, Sarah allowed herself a moment of weakness. A single tear rolled down her wrinkled face. "Please, God," she murmured, "give me strength for another day. And if it's your will, bring my Jason back to me." The days in Oakwood followed their usual pace, but Sarah Cole began to notice small changes in Jason's behavior. On a sunny morning, while adjusting the pillows, she saw his fingers twitch slightly. "Jason?" Sarah called, her heart racing. "Can you hear me, dear?" There was no response, but Sarah felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. In the days that followed, she watched Jason even more closely, noting slight movements of his eyes and subtle changes in his breathing. Kiara, the nurse, arrived for her usual shift. Sarah shared her observations, barely containing the excitement in her voice. "Mrs. Cole," Kiara said gently, "sometimes these movements happen. It doesn't necessarily mean—" "I know, dear," Sarah interrupted, "but this time it's different. I can feel it." Kiara nodded, but Sarah noticed a strange look in her eyes. Over the next few days, the young nurse seemed more nervous, frequently checking her phone and avoiding Sarah's gaze. The news of the changes in Jason's condition soon spread through the neighborhood. Mrs. Jenkins, Sarah's neighbor for decades, came over with a homemade pie. "Sarah, dear," she said, "I heard that Jason is showing signs of improvement. Is it true?" Sarah hesitated. "Well, there are some movements, but the doctors say it might not mean anything." Mrs. Jenkins gave a sympathetic smile. Of course. But it doesn't hurt to hope, right?" As well-intentioned visits multiplied, Sarah heard the whispers. Some neighbors expressed admiration for her dedication, while others questioned whether she was deluding herself. "Poor Sarah," Mrs. Peterson was heard telling another neighbor. 25 years is too long. Maybe she's seeing things that don't exist." Sarah ignored the comments, focusing on Jason. One night, exhausted after a long day, she fell asleep in the chair next to his bed. In her dream, Jason opened his eyes, smiled, and said, "Mom, I'm here." Sarah woke up startled, her heart pounding. She looked at Jason, but he remained as still as ever. Yet, the dream felt so real that she couldn't go back to sleep. The following week, Sarah took Jason to his regular appointment with Dr. Martinez. Anxious, she reported all the changes she had noticed. The doctor listened patiently, conducted some tests, and then turned to Sarah with a neutral expression. "Mrs. Cole, I understand your hope, but I see no significant changes in Jason's condition." "But doctor," Sarah insisted, "what about the movements? The changes in his breathing?" "Those could just be involuntary reflexes," he explained gently. "It's important not to build unrealistic expectations." Sarah left the office disheartened but not defeated. She knew her son better than anyone. If there was even a slight chance, she would cling to it. Back at home, Sarah noticed Kiara acting even stranger. The nurse seemed distracted, almost dropping a tray of medications. "Is everything all right, Kiara?" Sarah asked, concerned. Yes, Kiara replied quickly. "Just didn't sleep well last night." Sarah frowned but didn't insist. She had more important things to worry about. That night, sitting next to Jason, Sarah held his hand and whispered, "I know you're there, my son. No matter what they say, I feel it. And I'll be here, waiting as long as it takes." On a quiet night, as Sarah slept in her room, something extraordinary happened next door. Jason, after 25 years of immobility, slowly opened his eyes. Confused and disoriented, he blinked several times, trying to grasp where he was. Kiara, who was on her night shift, nearly dropped her clipboard upon seeing Jason awake. She rushed to his side, barely able to contain her emotion. "Jason," she whispered, afraid she was dreaming. "Can you hear me?" Jason moved his lips, attempting to speak. His voice came out hoarse and weak after years of disuse. "Water," he managed to say. With trembling hands, Kiara helped Jason drink some water. She was about to call for Sarah when Jason grabbed her arm, surprising her with his sudden strength. "Wait," he said with difficulty. "My mother, don't tell her yet." Kiara was perplexed. But Jason, your mother has been waiting for this moment for so long. Jason closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. I know. But I need time. To understand. To prepare. Reluctantly, Kiara agreed. In the days that followed, she secretly assisted Jason, always careful not to arouse Sarah's suspicions. At night, while Sarah slept, Kiara helped Jason with simple exercises. His initial movements were difficult and painful, but each day he gained more strength and control. Why don't you want your mother to know? Kiara asked one night while helping him sit up. Jason sighed. I heard everything, Kiara. All these years. Her sacrifice, her dedication. How can I just wake up and change everything overnight? Kiara understood Jason's dilemma, but couldn't help feeling they were deceiving Sarah. She would be so happy, Jason. Don't you think she deserves to know? Yes, she deserves it, Jason admitted. But I need to be ready. I need to be able to talk to her, to move. I don't want her to see me like this, weak and dependent. As Jason secretly recovered, Kiara found herself becoming increasingly emotionally involved. She admired his determination and was charmed by his emerging personality. One night, after a particularly difficult physical therapy session, Jason held Kiara's hand. Thank you, he said, looking into her eyes. I don't know what I'd do without you. Kiara's heart raced. She knew she was crossing a dangerous line, but couldn't stop the feelings growing inside her. During the day, Kiara had to pretend nothing had changed. She saw the hope in Sarah's eyes every time she entered the room, and felt a pang of guilt for keeping the secret. Kiara, dear, Sarah said one day, you've seemed so distracted lately. Is everything all right? Kiara forced a smile. Of course, Mrs. Cole. Just a bit tired, that's all. At night, alone with Jason, Kiara voiced her concerns. I don't know how long we can keep this a secret. Your mother is very perceptive. Jason nodded, understanding the difficult situation he had put Kiara in. I know. I promise we'll tell her soon. I just need a little more time. As days passed, Jason made remarkable progress. He could now sit up by himself and was beginning to form complete sentences. Kiara couldn't help but marvel at his recovery. You're amazing, Jason, she said one night after he managed to stand for a few seconds. Jason smiled, a smile that melted Kiara's heart. I have a great teacher, he replied. At that moment, something changed between them. Kiara knew she was falling in love, and she suspected Jason felt the same. But the shadow of the secret they shared loomed over them. Kiara, Jason said softly, I know I'm asking a lot from you. But I promise I'll tell my mom soon. I just need to be sure I can face whatever comes next. Kiara nodded, understanding Jason's fears and hopes. She knew they were playing with fire, that the secret could explode at any moment. But looking at Jason, seeing his courage and determination, she couldn't help but believe that somehow, everything would turn out right in the end. Sarah Cole noticed subtle changes in Kiara's behavior and small details out of place in Jason's room. Her mother's intuition told her something was wrong. One day, she found a crumpled note with the phrase, "Thank you for everything," written in shaky handwriting. Sarah's heart raced, but she tried to contain her hopes. After sleepless nights, Sarah made a drastic decision. She called Tom, a friend who worked with security systems, and asked for discreet cameras. With a heavy heart, Sarah installed the cameras in Jason's room when Kiara was not around. "Forgive me, Jason," she murmured. "Mom just wants to know the truth." In the following days, Sarah lived in constant anxiety, watching the recordings every night. On the third night, something changed. Sarah saw Kiara enter the room outside her normal hours. "It's okay," Kiara whispered. "Your mom is sleeping. We can continue with the exercises." What Sarah saw next left her in shock. Jason moved his head towards Kiara's voice, his eyes open and focused. Kiara helped him sit up and guided him through simple exercises. Sarah watched, tears in her eyes, the intimacy between Jason and Kiara. It was obvious that there was more than just a patient-nurse relationship there. Turning off the monitor, Sarah tried to process what she had discovered. Her son was awake, recovering, and she had been kept in the dark. Why? How to confront them? With a broken heart and a mind in turmoil, Sarah spent the night awake, determined to face the truth in the morning, no matter how painful it might be. Sarah felt the weight of the world on her shoulders as she climbed the stairs toward Jason's room. Her hands trembled, firmly gripping the tablet that held the evidence that would change their lives forever. As she opened the door, she found Jason sitting on the bed, talking animatedly with Kiara. The scene, once unimaginable, now felt like a surreal nightmare. "Jason?" Sarah's voice came out as a trembling whisper, causing both to turn abruptly. Jason's face turned pale, his eyes widening with a mix of shock and guilt. "Mom, No," Sarah interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "I don't want to hear excuses right now. I want the truth. All of it." Kiara stepped forward, her hands nervously intertwined. "Mrs. Cole, I can explain." "Explain what?" Sarah questioned, her voice shaking with emotion. "Explain how you both lied to me. How you played with my feelings." Jason tried to stand up, but his weak legs betrayed him. "Mom, please, it wasn't like that. I woke up a few weeks ago and—" "Weeks?" Sarah exclaimed, the pain evident in her voice. "You've been awake for weeks and didn't tell me anything?" The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of the revelation hanging in the air. Sarah looked at Kiara, who seemed on the verge of tears. "Why?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking. "Why did you do this to me?" Jason took a deep breath, gathering courage. I was scared, Mom. Scared of not being the son you remembered. Scared of disappointing you." Sarah felt as though she'd been punched in the stomach. "Disappointing me? Jason, you are my son. I've spent years praying for you to wake up, to hear your voice again." Kiara stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Mrs. Cole, it was my fault too. I should have told you, but I fell in love with Jason. And I knew that would complicate everything." Sarah looked at the two, trying to process everything she was hearing. The joy of seeing her son awake fought against the sense of betrayal and hurt. "Don't you understand?" Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "I would have accepted anything. Anything, as long as it meant you were back, Jason." Jason reached out, trying to touch his mother. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I really am. I needed time to find myself again." Sarah looked at her son, seeing not just the man he had become, but also the boy she had raised. Anger began to give way to a complex mix of emotions: relief, joy, confusion, and hurt. I don't know what to think now, Sarah said, her voice calmer but still laden with emotion. I'm glad you're awake, Jason. Happier than I can express. But this will take time for me to process. Kiera, with tears in her eyes, took a step toward the door. Maybe it's better if I leave for a while. You two need to talk. Jason looked at Kiera, then at his mother, clearly torn. Sarah noticed the look between the two and felt a pang in her heart. No, Sarah said, surprising everyone, including herself. Stay, Kiera. We need to sort this out. All of us. Silence filled the room again, each lost in their thoughts and emotions. The tension was palpable, no one knowing exactly how to proceed after this monumental revelation. Jason finally broke the silence. Mom, I know asking for forgiveness isn't enough. But I want you to know it was never my intention to hurt you. I needed to understand who I am now, before facing the world. Before facing you. Sarah looked at her son, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. She slowly approached the bed, sitting on the edge. Jason, I love you. Nothing will change that. But it will take time to rebuild trust. Kiera, still standing near the door, spoke softly. Mrs. Cole, I understand if you want me to leave. What we did was unethical, and I... Sarah raised her hand, interrupting Kiera. It's not that simple, Kiera. You took care of my son when I couldn't. And now you're part of this mess too. The air in the room seemed electrified, charged with conflicting emotions and newly revealed truths. No one knew exactly what the future held, but one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same. Sarah looked out the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange. She turned to Jason and Kiera, her voice firm yet gentle. Let's talk. All of us. It's time to lay all our cards on the table and figure out how to move forward. Jason's awakening and the revelation of the secret triggered an emotional storm within the Cole family. The house, once a sanctuary of silent care, now echoed with raised voices and slamming doors. Sarah oscillated between uncontrollable joy and deep anger. My son is alive, truly alive, she exclaimed one moment, embracing Jason with tears in her eyes. The next moment, resentment took over. How could you deceive me like this? After everything I've done for you. Jason, still adjusting to his new reality, struggled with a whirlwind of emotions. Guilt consumed him. Mom, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to be strong enough for you. But the guilt quickly gave way to frustration. Don't you understand? I needed this time for myself. Kiera, caught in the middle of this emotional hurricane, tried to navigate between her love for Jason and her professional loyalty. Mrs. Cole, please understand. We only wanted to protect you. But her words felt empty even to herself. The arguments became frequent and intense. On one particularly tense afternoon, Sarah shouted, 25 years. I've dedicated 25 years of my life to you, Jason. And this is how you repay me? Jason, feeling the weight of that devotion as a burden, retorted, I didn't ask for this, Mom. I didn't ask you to give up your life for me. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah left the room in tears, leaving Jason devastated and Kiera unsure of what to do. News of Jason's miraculous awakening spread quickly through the small town of Oakwood. What should have been a cause for celebration soon became a source of gossip and divided opinions. At the local market, Mrs. Jenkins commented, Poor Sarah. After all that sacrifice, to be deceived by her own son. Meanwhile, at the town bar, Mr. Peterson defended Jason. The guy needed space. You don't understand the pressure of waking up after so long? The community, once united in support of Sarah, now split. Some neighbors stopped visiting, unsure how to act in light of the new family dynamics. Others came more frequently, driven by poorly disguised curiosity. Kiera faced her own challenges. Her colleagues at the hospital looked at her with suspicion. "How could you keep such a secret?" asked a nurse. "That's not ethical." The pressure from all sides affected the nascent relationship between Jason and Kiera. What started as a deep connection forged in secrecy now faced public scrutiny. Maybe we should take a break," Kiera suggested one night, her voice trembling. "Until things calm down." Jason, feeling he might lose the only person who truly understood him, pleaded, "No, Kiera. I need you. We can get through this together." Sarah, observing the intimacy between her son and the nurse, felt a mix of jealousy and resentment. She knew all along, she murmured to herself, "while I lived in ignorance." Nights at the Cole house became an emotional minefield. Meals were consumed in tense silence, broken only by the clinking of cutlery. Trivial conversations turned into heated arguments in seconds. Jason, determined to regain his independence, insisted on doing more on his own. "I can dress myself, Mom," he shouted, frustrated with Sarah's constant attempts to help him. Sarah, in turn, struggled to find her place in this new reality. "What am I now?" she wondered during the long sleepless nights. "If I'm no longer the caregiver, who am I?" Kiera, torn between her professional duty and her personal feelings, seriously considered leaving the case. "This is getting too complicated," she confided to a friend. "But how can I abandon them now?" As the days passed, the tension in the Cole household only grew. The initial joy of Jason's awakening had been replaced by a complex and painful reality. Each member of this unlikely triad, devoted mother, reborn son, and passionate nurse, struggled to find their place in this new world. The town of Oakwood watched from afar, waiting to see how this extraordinary story would unfold. Meanwhile, inside the Cole house, 3 wounded hearts sought a path to healing, unsure if they would ever find the peace they so desperately craved. The tension in the Cole household reached a new peak when Jason finally revealed a shocking truth. Throughout his time in a coma, he could hear and understand everything around him. "Mom," Jason said, his voice trembling, "I heard every word, every prayer, every moment of despair." Sarah was paralyzed, the implications of this revelation hitting her like a wave. You heard everything?" she whispered, recalling all the times she had broken down in tears by Jason's bedside, all the intimate confessions she had made, believing he could not hear her. Jason nodded, tears in his eyes. "I wanted to respond, wanted to tell you I was here, but I couldn't. It was torture." This revelation opened a Pandora's box of emotions and memories. Sarah found herself revisiting every decision she had made over the past 25 years, now under a new light. One day, while going through old medical documents, Sarah made a disturbing discovery. There were records of an experimental treatment she had authorized years ago, a treatment that doctors believed could awaken Jason but carried significant risks. "Oh God," Sarah murmured, her hands trembling. What if I made things worse?" Guilt consumed her. She spent sleepless nights tormented by the possibility that she had prolonged Jason's suffering unknowingly. Meanwhile, the financial reality of the situation began to weigh on the family. Sarah's savings, accumulated over years of hard work as a nurse, were nearly depleted. Medical bills continued to arrive, now with new treatments and therapies for Jason's recovery. How are we going to pay for all this? Sarah wondered, staring at the pile of bills on the kitchen table. The financial stress added a new layer of tension to the already fragile family dynamics. Kiara, in turn, faced her own ethical battles at work. Her colleagues and supervisors questioned her professional conduct, considering her involvement with Jason a serious breach. "Do you understand that this could cost you your license, don't you?" her boss warned her during a tense meeting. Kiara knew she was walking a fine line. Her love for Jason and her desire to help him were in direct conflict with her professional ethics. Each day at work became a precarious balancing act. As if the situation weren't complicated enough, a new element entered the scene. Mark Evans, an ambitious local journalist, sniffed out the coal story and saw it as the opportunity of his career. Mark began asking questions around town, gathering information and rumors. He showed up at the Cole's doorstep one day, a friendly smile masking his intentions. "Mrs. Cole," he said, "your son's story is incredible. The public deserves to know more about this medical miracle." Sarah hesitated, suspicious. "We have nothing to say. Please respect our privacy." But Mark didn't give up easily. He began to dig deeper, uncovering details about the experimental treatment, the family's finances, and Kiara's involvement. The threat of public exposure hung over them like a dark cloud. Jason, already struggling to adjust to his new reality, now feared that every aspect of his life would be exposed and scrutinized. "We can't let this happen," he said to Kiara one night, panic evident in his voice. "I'm not ready for the world to know." Kiara tried to calm him, but she herself was terrified at the thought of her professional conduct being publicly scrutinized. Sarah, feeling like she was losing control of the situation, made a drastic decision. She contacted an old friend who was a lawyer, seeking legal advice on how to protect her family from media intrusion. As secrets threatened to surface, each member of the Cole family found themselves facing the consequences of their past actions and decisions. The truth, long suppressed, was about to emerge, threatening to destroy the fragile foundations they had built. The town of Oakwood, once a peaceful haven, now buzzed with speculation and gossip. The Coles, once viewed with sympathy and admiration, were now objects of curiosity and judgment. Amid this turmoil, Jason, Sarah, and Kiara found themselves more united than ever, facing a world that threatened to crumble around them. They knew that the revelations to come could change their lives forever, and they could only hope to have enough strength to face what was to come. The tension that had been building in the Cole household finally reached a breaking point. Jason, feeling suffocated by Sarah's constant presence and concern, made a decision that would shake the foundation of the family. "Mom," he said, his voice firm but trembling, "I need space. I'm moving out with Kiara." Sarah's face turned pale, her eyes filling with tears. But you just woke up. You need care, you need." "No, Mom," Jason interrupted. "I need to learn to live my own life. I can't stay here, being treated like an invalid child." Jason's words hit Sarah like a punch in the stomach. 25 years of dedication seemed to crumble before her eyes. She watched, powerless, as Jason, with Kiara's help, packed his few belongings. The day of the move was charged with emotion. Sarah, standing at the door, watched her son leave, feeling as if a part of her was being torn away. Jason looked back one last time, a mix of guilt and determination in his eyes, before getting into Kiara's car. With Jason's departure, Sarah found herself alone for the first time in decades. The house, once filled with medical equipment and the constant sound of monitors, was now silent and empty. Sarah wandered through the rooms, feeling lost and without purpose. Who am I now? She wondered, looking at Jason's photos on the walls. If I'm no longer a caregiver, what's left for me? Meanwhile, Jason and Kiara faced their own challenges. The initial excitement of living together soon gave way to harsh reality. Jason, still recovering, had good days and bad days. His frustration with his limitations often manifested in irritation directed at Kiara. "I can do this alone," he would shout when Kiara tried to help him with simple tasks. Kiara, for her part, found herself torn between her role as girlfriend and caregiver. The stress began to affect her job. Her superiors noticed her distraction and fatigue. Kiara, her boss, called her one day. "We need to talk about your involvement with patient Jason Cole. It's affecting your performance." The pressure from all directions was testing Jason and Kiara's relationship. Arguments became more frequent, the silence between them heavier. Back at the Cole house, Sarah faced her own identity crisis. Without Jason to care for, she felt adrift. She tried to resume old hobbies, but nothing seemed to fill the void. One day, while cleaning Jason's room, Sarah found an old photo album. Images of Jason before the accident, smiling and full of life, made her break down in tears. "I dedicated my life to him," she sobbed, hugging the album. "And now, what's left for me?" The news of Jason's move spread quickly through the small town of Oakwood. Opinions were divided. Some supported Jason's quest for independence, while others criticized his ingratitude towards Sarah. "After all she's done for him," Mrs. Jenkins commented at the local market, "is this how he repays her?" Mr. Peterson, however, had a different view. "The boy needs to live his life. Sarah can't expect to be his caregiver forever." These conversations reached Sarah's ears, increasing her sense of failure and abandonment. She began to avoid leaving the house, fearing the pitying or judgmental looks from her neighbors. Jason, for his part, struggled with his own guilt. He knew how much his decision had hurt his mother, but he also felt it was necessary for his own recovery and growth. "I couldn't stay there, Kiara," he confided one night. "It was like time had stopped. Like I was still that 20-year-old kid who had the accident." Kiara tried to be understanding, but the stress of the situation was affecting her health and her job. She began to question whether she had made the right decision in getting involved with Jason. The situation reached a critical point when Sarah, unable to cope with the loneliness and loss of purpose, had a nervous breakdown. It was the neighbors, worried after not seeing her for days, who called an ambulance. Jason received the news of his mother's condition with a mix of guilt and concern. He rushed to the hospital, leaving Kiara behind, feeling once again like an outsider in the Cole family dynamics. As Sarah recovered in the hospital, Jason found himself confronting the consequences of his actions. The dream of independence and a new life with Kiara seemed to be disintegrating in the face of the harsh reality of his recovery and his mother's emotional needs. The Cole family, once united by love and dedication, was now fragmented, each member struggling to find their place in a world that had changed drastically. The crisis they had feared had finally arrived, leaving a trail of broken hearts and shattered dreams in its path. Weeks had passed since Sarah's collapse, and the emotional storm that had engulfed the Cole family seemed endless. Now physically recovered but emotionally drained, Sarah contemplated a decision she had never imagined she would have to make. Sitting in the empty living room of her home, Sarah stared at the suitcases at her feet. "Maybe it's time to leave Oakwood behind," she murmured to herself. The idea of moving, of leaving behind 25 years of memories, was both terrifying and strangely liberating. Sarah picked up the phone, her fingers hovering over her sister's number in Seattle. A move could be a new beginning, a chance to rediscover who she was beyond being Jason's mother. Meanwhile, in the small house that Jason and Kiera shared, the atmosphere was equally tense. Jason, frustrated with the slow progress of his recovery, was becoming increasingly irritable. "I should be better by now," he yelled one day, knocking over a glass of water that Kiera was trying to hand him. "Why aren't things getting better?" Kiera, exhausted and heartbroken, tried to stay calm. "Jason, recovery takes time. You need to be patient." But patience was running thin for both of them. Arguments became more frequent, and moments of tenderness increasingly rare. One morning, as Jason struggled to dress himself, he felt a sudden dizziness. The room began to spin, and he fell, hitting his head on the corner of the dresser. Kiera, hearing the thud, rushed into the room. "Jason," she cried out, finding him on the floor, a trickle of blood running down his forehead. At the hospital, doctors examined Jason with concern. "Mr. Cole," Dr. Martinez said, his tone serious, "I'm worried about these new symptoms. We need to conduct more tests to understand what's happening." The news of Jason's relapse spread quickly. Sarah, who was about to call her sister about the move, felt her heart tighten. Despite everything, her maternal instinct took over, and she rushed to the hospital. In the hallway, Sarah found Kiera, her eyes red from crying. For a moment, the two women looked at each other, years of resentment and jealousy giving way to shared concern. "How is he?" Sarah asked, her voice almost a whisper. Kiera shook her head. "They don't know. They're doing more tests." As they waited for news, Kiera received a call that would further complicate matters. It was from her former boss at the hospital where she worked. "Kiera," he said, "I know you're going through a tough time, but an opportunity has come up. A hospital in Chicago is looking for a nurse with your experience. It would be a significant advancement in your career." Kiera was silent, her world spinning. Part of her longed for this chance to start over, to escape the tension and drama of recent months. But how could she leave Jason now, when he needed her the most? The hours dragged on in the hospital. Sarah and Kiera, sitting side by side in the waiting room, were the picture of exhaustion and worry. Finally, Dr. Martinez appeared, his expression grave. "Jason's condition is more complicated than we thought," he explained. "There are signs that the recovery may not be as stable as we hoped." The doctor's words landed like a weight on Sarah and Kiera. All plans, all hopes for the future, seemed to be crumbling. Sarah, feeling the weight of her earlier decision, thought of the suitcase prepared at home. How could she even consider leaving now? Kiera, meanwhile, looked at her phone, thinking about the job offer in Chicago. The chance for a new life, away from all this suffering, seemed tempting. But would the emotional cost be too high? At that moment, with Jason unconscious in a hospital bed, Sarah and Kiera faced impossible choices. Staying meant facing more pain, more conflict. Leaving meant abandoning someone they deeply loved. Dr. Martinez, sensing the emotional turmoil, added gently, You two have been Jason's strength throughout this time. Now, more than ever, he needs you united." Those words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sarah and Kiara looked at each other, years of resentment and competition dissolving before the harsh reality they faced. "What are we going to do?" Kiara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah, feeling the weight of decades of maternal care and love, responded with renewed determination, "We'll do what we've always done. We'll fight for him." The two women, united by their love for Jason, now faced their greatest challenge. The future was uncertain, filled with difficult choices and painful paths. But in that moment, in the hospital waiting room, they found a connection that transcended their differences. The Cole family was on the brink, facing a choice that could either permanently separate them or unite them like never before. Jason's fate, and theirs, hung by a thread, and only time would tell which path the future held for them. Fate sometimes has a peculiar way of bringing people together. For the Cole family, that moment arrived unexpectedly and powerfully. It was a Saturday afternoon when the hospital's fire alarm went off. Amidst the chaos of the evacuation, Sarah and Kiara found themselves working side by side to ensure the safety of Jason and the other patients. In that crisis moment, all grievances and resentments were forgotten. They were simply two women united by love for one person. Fortunately, the fire was quickly controlled, but the event served as a catalyst for the family. As they watched the firefighters leave the hospital, Sarah broke the silence. "Too much life has already been lost," she said, her voice choked. "We can't afford to waste more time on anger and regrets." Kiara nodded, tears in her eyes. "You're right. Jason needs us. Both of us." This moment of mutual understanding marked the beginning of a new phase for the Coles. Sarah, inspired by Kiara's bravery during the emergency, found a new purpose. She began working with support groups for families of coma patients, sharing her experience and offering comfort to others facing similar situations. "Every story I hear makes me realize how lucky I am," Sarah confided to Kiara one day. Jason woke up. Many don't get that chance. Touched by Sarah's transformation, Kiara decided to decline the job offer in Chicago. Instead, she dedicated herself to helping Jason in his recovery, now with Sarah's full support. Jason, sensing the change in dynamics between his mother and Kiara, found new motivation to recover. With both of their help, he resumed his music studies, relearning how to play the guitar. As days passed, the Cole home, once a place of tension and silence, now echoed with the soft notes of Jason's guitar and the laughter of three people who had learned to be a family. The community of Oakwood, silent witnesses to this extraordinary journey, decided to organize an event to celebrate Jason's recovery and honor Sarah and Kiara's dedication. On the day of the event, the town's small park was decorated with ribbons and balloons. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers touched by the Cole story gathered to show their support. Jason, nervous but determined, stepped onto the makeshift stage. With Kiara and Sarah in the front row, he plucked the first notes of a song he had composed during his recovery. His voice, hoarse from disuse but filled with emotion, filled the air. "Through the darkness, I heard your voices, calling me back, giving me choices. Mom, your love kept me alive. Kiara, your care, a new drive." There wasn't a dry eye in the audience when Jason finished. Sarah and Kiara, holding hands, cried openly, their hearts overflowing with pride and love. After the performance, Sarah took the stage. Looking out at the crowd, she began. 25 years ago, I thought my life was over when Jason went into a coma. Today, I realize it was just the beginning of an incredible journey. I've learned about strength, perseverance, and the power of unconditional love. She paused, looking affectionately at Kiara and Jason. I've also learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about who stands by you in the toughest times. Kiara, she said, reaching out to the young woman, you are as much a part of this family as Jason and I. Sarah's words were met with emotional applause from the audience. Kiara, tears in her eyes, joined Sarah and Jason on stage, the three united in a hug that symbolized their new beginning. In the months that followed, the Coles found a new rhythm to their lives. Jason continued his recovery, now determined to use his experience to help other brain injury patients. Kiara, inspired by her journey with the Coles, decided to specialize in neurology. And Sarah, finding peace in her new role, became a tireless advocate for family caregivers. One afternoon, as the three shared a quiet moment in the garden, Jason looked at his mother and Kiara and said, "You know, during those years in a coma, I dreamt of a moment like this. Being here, with the two people I love most in the world. It seemed impossible then, but look at us now." Sarah smiled, taking Jason's hand. "Life gave us a second chance, dear. And this time, we'll get it right." Kiara, feeling truly part of the family for the first time, added, "Together. We'll do everything together." And so, under the golden sun of an autumn afternoon in Oakwood, the Cole family embraced their new chapter. A story of love, loss, redemption, and above all, the unbreakable power of the human